Okay. You should start to see the green, the recording in the corner when it's.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Women in Research Ireland's first event of 2021. I'm Dr. Cathy Corcoran, committee member and treasurer with Women in Research Ireland, or WIRI for short. I would like to take a moment to introduce the directors and founding members of WIRI attending today's event. Dr. Susan Feddix is our co-director and co-founder of WIRI.
Hello.
And Dr. Joanne Kenny, co-director.
Hi, everyone.
So let me start by giving you a little bit of background about WIRI. Women in Research Ireland was founded in 2017 and is a volunteer-run charity based here in Dublin, Ireland, and a group member of the National Women's Council of Ireland. WIRI's mission is to unite and build an empowering, diverse, and inclusive community of underrepresented groups where silenced voices are heard in academic spaces. WIRI provides a platform for women and members of underrepresented groups working in research and academia in Ireland. Monthly events afford the opportunity to gather and discuss solutions to problems that affect our network. Since March of 2020, we've switched our events online. Please mark your calendars for our next event. Dr. Terry Gibbons will give a talk on inclusive leadership in academia on Friday, February 9th at 5 p.m. Irish Standard Time. In addition, WIRI received a grant from the Royal Society of Chemistry Inclusion and Diversity Fund to host a free workshop series called Addressing Mental Health, a Proactive Approach for Researchers. That series will begin in March. You can learn more about WIRI on our website at womeninresearch.ie and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Now for today's event. We're delighted to welcome Vanessa Lacey. Vanessa is Health and Education Manager with TENI, Transgender Equality Network Ireland. Vanessa has worked with TENI since 2010. In her role, she designs and delivers transgender-related training for healthcare professionals throughout Ireland. She was directly responsible for creating the family support group TransParenCI in 2011, which currently supports over 280 families. Vanessa has a BA Honours in Psychology and has recently passed her PhD viva voce examination. Her research focused on grief and loss experienced by adult trans women and their families. Vanessa has worked on numerous occasions with media and is a published author both in media and academically. She's a member of various HSE and Tusla committees on both national and regional levels. Vanessa is also a member of the World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare and its European version. Vanessa is also a proud parent. The title of Vanessa's presentation today is Tracademia, the experiences of trans people in academia, the joy and the pain. We encourage you to live tweet this event on social media by using the hashtag WIRI and hashtag Tracademia. Lastly, today's event is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. Please keep your microphones on mute during the presentation. If you have any questions for Vanessa, please type them into the chat and we will share them at the end of the presentation. Welcome, Vanessa.
I was going to say good morning there, but good afternoon. Thanks a million, Cathy, and once again, thanks to WIRI for the invite. You know, I'm really grateful that you give me a voice and allow me to speak about, I suppose, trans women's experience in research in Ireland. And I suppose there's no better place to start but at the beginning. And I always think in terms of giving training, it's always good to give some form of a foundation. I have a presentation here, but I might just speak and just leave that slide up there and just speak to my experiences and the experiences of working with other people in terms of research in Ireland. So this time last week, actually, I just submitted my amended thesis after viva voce, and Kathy spoke about my passing my viva voce examination. And so I'm 6 days away from handing that in, and I feel so much relieved, and certainly, you know, I don't know how I got here. You know, it's just like, you know, and I pressed the send button last week. It was just like, oh God, what does this mean? To send in the amended PhD thesis with the hope then of the examiners making a decision, hopefully in support of the amended thesis. So, so it's lots of stuff going on at the moment, but it also brings up lots of reflections in terms of how did I get here? You know, so I was born in Waterford's oldest city, or Ireland's oldest city, Waterford, in 1964. And for me, I struggled throughout my life in terms of gender conflict. I'm not going to go into too much of that. We only have a short time and just about research. So I'm just going to jump really quickly forward to when I was 43 years of age. When I was 43 years of age, I decided to gender transition. And at that time, I was in a relationship and I have 2 young sons. And Kathy mentioned in my bio there that I'm a proud parent. So it was brilliant to have my 2 sons on our Zoom quiz night, Zoom coronavirus quiz night on Thursday night, just last night. So when did I get involved in research? I suppose really from 43 to try and get a better understanding of who I was in the world and what did it mean to gender transition in an Irish society was my first piece of research, and how I would cope with that, and then the reactions from my own family. In terms of my own education, I suppose I left school at 14 years of age, and I hadn't really I didn't pass any formal examinations, so I came into doing into research which really without them foundations myself. So at 43 years of age, not only did I decide to gender transition, but also to look to how I would sustain that, how I would sustain my transition, what kind of training that I need then to work in society for kind of a parallel approach to my gender transition, and also to develop new skills to be able to work in an area that I felt was meaningful for me. So that research would have encompassed a number of different areas, and I attended an adolescent guidance counsellor who suggested that maybe counselling might be an option. It was one of 20 options, and counselling was one of them. So my first area of academia was accessing a counselling course in WIT, a foundation in counselling. So that was my first experience of academia, and having to do assignments and presenting them. And I got really good feedback and good results. And as Kathy again mentioned, I went on to do a BA in psychology. So during that, I suppose I had the option of, it wasn't an option to do my own dissertation. And I decided to do my dissertation on the experiences of transgender people. However, the ethics committee in the college, or the university, or the college that I was in at that time, decided that it was a too sensitive topic, and it was sidelined, even though I had done so much work on developing this research, where my own supervisor mentioned I did not need to attend the class anymore because I was so far ahead, because I was so far prepared, I suppose. So it was devastating to hear the ethics committee at that stage decided not to put my research forward. So it gave me 3 months to put a new proposal together, but I could not include transgender people's awareness in there. So that was really devastating at that time. So my first piece of undergrad research was a quantitative study, in the end, focusing on the experiences of, it was a comparative study actually between mature students and younger students in their experience of perceived stress and coping strategies. And so that was my first immersion into research, and I had to get it done in 3 months. So it was extremely stressful, and it was my own experience of being a trans woman in the world, transitioning in third level education with no foundation of education itself, and then doing this quantitative study in a very small window of time, and it was extremely stressful. But I got it done, and I got a good mark for it. During my degree, I started working with TENI. I was very lucky to get a job halfway through my degree. So again, worked part-time at TENI, and it was a full-time degree then as well. So I suppose I learned the skills, and I did my own research in terms of transgender persons' experience, because my job related to presenting to healthcare staff. So it was important that I had the knowledge. So when I finished then my degree, I worked full-time at TENI. So it was a quite busy role at that time, and certainly Ireland at that time had very little trans-specific research. There was lots of lesbian and gay research. I attended many events. I remember being down in UL and listening to the wonderful Dr. Aoife Neary speaking their experience of LGBT young people in school. And I remember being a boisterous transgender activist, I suppose, saying, well, there's no transgender people involved in this research. And since this, Aoife has really turned the tables on that and done incredible research in terms of primary school children and post-primary school children. And she's a wonderful colleague, and very proud to know her. So I think, you know, the experiences of that, and then we ourselves in TENI published the first piece of research in 2013 called Speaking from the Margins, which was the experiences of transgender people in Ireland in relation to many different areas, and in respect of mental health, in respect to access in healthcare, in respect to families, in respect to quality of life ourselves. And we had 164 respondents for that. So it was my task, I suppose, or one of my tasks is to try and get as many transgender participants to partake in this study. So again, it's the involvement of ourselves in the research at time, where there was very little knowledge in the area around transgender specific research. So I suppose at that time, again, I keep saying at that time, I was working not only with healthcare professionals, but I was also partnering with many universities and institutes of technology throughout Ireland, from Trinity College, DCU, UCD, NUIG, UL, UCC, you know, all the main universities in Ireland, and Institute of Technologies and colleges. And it was such a privilege to be asked in there to be able to speak to the students and present on transgender issues. And I suppose I'm getting to my own topic now in terms of my thesis that I sent in last Saturday morning. And that kind of took place because of a presentation that I gave in Limerick Institute of Technology, and to the wonderful social care lecturer down there, Jennifer Stritch, as part of the Loss and Grief group down in Limerick Institute of Technology. And I blame Jennifer for the last 5 years of stress, I suppose, that I was under. But she gave me a platform. You know, you're talking about supporting transgender people, and you know, WIRI are great today for again platforming me and giving us the opportunity to represent transgender people in research, and especially transgender women research, because there's very little knowledge again in this area. So Jennifer was really wonderful in pushing that and supporting me to do an MA in terms of families' experiences of loss and grief. So on exploring them, I suppose, and really looking in terms of the literature and what was available, I just thought, well, I was kind of conflicted myself in terms of transgender women and transgender people are also part of families. So I absolutely included transgender women. So the thesis in the end ended up being an exploration of the experiences of adult transgender women and family members of adult transgender women in Ireland. So 2 years into that thesis, I suppose, it was suggested that I had so much wonderful, rich data from the incredible 16 participants that took part in that study, and they shared their heart and soul, and they really gave us so much really strong information in terms of their own experiences that would hopefully now, and have already done, fed into workshops to support transgender people and transgender women and family members of our community as well. So the transfer was passed, and it was again a long process. If there's anything underlying this is again being resilient. I worked for TENI full time at that time, and then it was a full-time piece of research as well. So it was between 60 and 70 hours a week. So there was no days off. I mean, of course, I took time off. Jesus, I mean, I watched a wonderful presentation on YouTube this morning in terms of breeding from a presenter that presented in WIRI there a couple of weeks ago. And this is why I decided not to use the presentation there, because our presentation came over so well. And very much the experiences of the stressors that we would experience doing the research. And my experience was working full-time with TENI, as much as I was very grateful they gave me some time off to do that. And again, I'm extremely grateful to them for doing it. But also you're doing a full-time piece of research. So again, really it's staying focused. And I suppose the meaning of the research itself kept me focused. It kept my focus and kept me focused on what I wanted to do and what I suppose promised the participants I would do, and that was to amplify their voices. Number one, that's what I wanted to do, was just get their voices out. And many of them said that when, is that the hope that their experiences get out there, and their voices then would change the way that transgender healthcare in Ireland looks at the experiences of transgender women, and also for the experiences of families of transgender people as well. And it was at that point of the transfer that the two other very important people, supervisors, I suppose, came into the research, and that was the wonderful Dr. Frank Houghton in Limerick Institute of Technology, and the exceptional Associate Professor Dr. Amanda Haynes of the Hate and Hostility Group in UL. And between the three of them, I refer to them as the 3 degrees in the end, and there were different degrees of sanity and insanity at times, and they really put me to the wire, and we absolutely worked around the research and my methodology, because I wanted to know the meaning of the experiences of transgender person. So I deemed hermeneutic phenomenology to be the right methodology to I suppose, to approach the data in a very sensitive way to understand the meaning that would come from that, and that we look at people's experiences, their lived experiences. They all have different lived experiences in different way, and it's extremely important, I suppose, to understand as a researcher my own role in that. And certainly my supervisors were very supportive, constructive, and really motivated me to keep going at times when I struggled to do so, because it's not only was it the research I was doing, it was also very much brought up so many different memories for me also. in terms of the family members' experiences and the transgender women's experiences. And I listened to them, the transcripts, and many occasions. I turned my front room into their voices, really, different colored A1 sheets, and I posted them all over my room. And it's a bit like a film, really. And all their voices spoke to me every time I entered that room. And, you know, I'm very much part of the hermeneutic circle, where I would look at them and re-look at them and reread and rewrite and re-understand and really get a good view and a good sense of what the meaning of the experiences of grief and loss was for family members and trans women. And that really spoke. But I really sat and really dwelt with that data for quite a long period of time in my spare room. And I was privileged, absolutely privileged, to do so, in terms of the wonderful experience, and not the wonderful experience, the really robust, I suppose, experiences that the people recounted to me, the participants recounted to me. So in terms of, you know, hermeneutic phenomenology, reflexivity is a major part of that, because I interpret what the people's experiences themselves, and I had to have an understanding of myself in terms of being in that research. So very much quite a significant piece in the methodology chapter is including my own reflexive experiences of being in the world as a woman who gender transitioned, who presented for 43 years in a male form, who had all them different experiences and all them different conflicts as well. And they weren't all negative. I mean, I have 2 sons. So I have lots of wonderful experiences as well as negative experiences. And but again, writing those reflexive accounts were quite trying in terms of putting that information in terms of my own journey and my own challenges in terms of coming out in the world as a transgender woman as well, and the fragmentation, I suppose, I've had from some of my own loved ones as well. I suppose coming from the methodology, you know, certainly, you know, looking at the findings of my study, certainly overarching both the transgender women and the family members was the experience of ambiguous loss. So not quite sure, there was a loss, but not quite sure what the loss was. And the theory of ambiguous loss, I'm not sure how many people are aware of them. And it was, I suppose, a theory was developed by Dr. Pauline Voss in the University of Minnesota because of the incredible work she's done over the years in terms of family stress models and her work in terms of ambiguous loss. And ambiguous loss is in 2 types, I suppose, physically absent and psychologically present, or vice versa. In terms of, I suppose, Alzheimer's or dementia, when the person is physically present but they're psychologically absent, or in terms of if someone is incarcerated, so they are psychologically present but physically absent, because you still know the person is alive but you just can't see them anymore. So in terms of transgender people and family members, they can experience that feeling of ambiguous loss, that conflict and confusing loss that is often unresolved because the family member is living with that and living with the loss that the transgender person has transitioned to a different gender. So I would have interviewed 11 family members. I interviewed fathers, I've interviewed mothers of adult transgender women, not the same as the participants, just to mention. I was very cautious in terms of doing, of course, ethically doing damage to people's lives. So there were separate groups. There were transgender women were of a separate group to the family members of transgender women. I interviewed adult sons of transgender women, adult daughters of transgender women, adult brothers of transgender women, stepwomen of transgender women, and 5 transgender women themselves. And in terms of the transgender women and the findings, absolutely, they experienced not just ambiguous loss, but various different losses, and a loss of an ambiguous loss of their gendered self, being from a very young age and having that conflict and confusion in terms of who are they in the world and where do they fit in the world, and having to internalize that sense of shame. There was one woman who experienced listening to the radio, and she experienced this conflict all the time. She knew her gender. She felt she knew her gender identity as female, but she could never present as a female. And she spoke about her sisters. And there was one day when she was quite young, and she listened to this radio program with this trans woman on it who was speaking about her experiences. And she spoke about how she was incarcerated for that. And that again was internalized in this woman as a child. So if she had have persisted that she was female, then she would have also been internalized. So that experience again of that loss of the self and hiding the self, and really afraid to show who you are in the world and your own authenticity. So then when they went into relationships then, and the secrecy that was inside them relationships with their loved ones, and then how that news came out, and how they decided to either tell their partners or their wives or their loved ones that they wanted to gender transition, and then the further fragmentation and ambiguous loss because they transitioned at that time, and the further losses of home, losses of relationship. There was one situation where one of the women was not told about a family member who had passed away because the family were afraid that the woman might turn up at the funeral. So even to that extent, that the losses, the ongoing losses for transgender women, but overarching that was the dominant theme of ambiguous loss. So, you kind of see, and I work with many families, as I mentioned in my bio earlier on, in terms of transparency and developing transparency, and working with many family members over the years. I got to see like there's just two sides to this. It's not just one side. It's just the transgender person's experience is quite harrowing, and sometimes it's perceived as the family members are transphobic, and whereas maybe sometimes they're just like confused, they're experiencing ambiguous loss and a lack of understanding, and maybe a lack of empathy, maybe the frustration and anger towards that as well. So in terms of the family members' experience then, certainly very much again, the dominant theme again that was overarching was the experiences of ambiguous loss. And it was very much a traumatic loss at the beginning for the participants to have. For most of the participants, not all the participants, there was one participant who experienced an ambiguous gain somewhat, because she was very young at the time. She was 11 years of age. She knew there was something happening in her family. She thought her dad was ill, or that her dad was dying, or that they were going to her parents were going to split up. And when she became aware that her dad was going to gender transition to a female form and stay together, she was relieved. So she experienced that ambiguous lane. Then she did experience other ambiguous losses due to that. But at the same time, it wasn't all an experience of traumatic loss. But most of the participants in the study, family members, experienced an ambiguous loss, traumatic loss. And that was the shock, the denial, the anger. And the anger really came through from some of the participants, and they were so frustrated about this. I remember the brother spoke about the picture on the wall, and the trans woman kept saying, like, you need to be more respectful of my gender identity, and of course you understand that. And the brother was really angry in the interview, and he said, what the fuck does she think? Does she want me to paint a dress and on an old photograph in the home. So again, that anger, and really an interesting part of that interview is, as much as that brother was quite angry at time in the interview, he never mispronounced his sister once, so I thought I really got a lot from that. So yes, the families experienced that traumatic loss and grief, and also experienced the loss of normalcy, experienced that conflicting and confusing loss in terms of understanding their loved one, their transgender loved one in a different way, and again not having the language. I suppose, and Gadamer would have spoke about the language in terms of hermeneutic phenomenology, in terms of able to comprehend what has happened to you. And again, that leads into trauma research as well, in terms of not having that understanding. Whereas one of the adult daughters spoke about, and she referred to her parent as he throughout, that he, I know he's there, but I just don't know how to understand what is happening with my dad. At times, I know he's across the road, but I just can't go and see him. I just can't face that. But she could take a phone call, but not see him. So again, it's going back to the confusion and the conflict and the unresolved nature of that, and also then the loss of rituals, because there's no rituals then to celebrate or not the situation where the trans woman for themselves and also for the family members have detransitioned in terms of the name and the pronoun and where they are now in the family. So again, there's nothing there really. We live in a mainly a non-transgender world, or a cisgender world is a term that's normally used in terms of societal constructs, and we don't have them constructs or scaffolds to be able to give us the skills to be better able to understand gender transition in the context of family members. And I think really the study then really, I would think, brought that to the fore in terms of there's two sides to this. It's not just the one side. And really coming from this, we would hope that healthcare professionals are more trained in the area of transgender healthcare, which included ambiguous loss, of course, because it came through very strongly in this thesis. And yeah, hopefully that we will be there as an organization to be able to train health professionals to be able to address the needs of family members and transgender people, to be able to, I suppose, facilitate that situation, to, I suppose, give the family some time and space, and for the transgender women to have absolutely to be able to move on with their life, that they can then both be maybe to reintegrate the new gender identity or presentation into the family then at that time. So it was it was a long journey. It was definitely a long journey, and a long journey for the participants in terms of their life experiences. And as I mentioned, it was an absolute privilege to do the thesis. And yes, for me, quite exhausted after it, and straight back into work then on Monday. And yeah, it does take a lot out of, from that perspective, it does take a lot out, or it did take a lot out of me, I think. And I did lose my dad in March during COVID, during the start of COVID. And of course, that was, in terms of when you're researching family and family loss and grief, and your own parent, I suppose, dies, it puts an extra layer of pressure on you in terms of having to address that. So I'm lucky to have good people around me, and I think that's a key part of doing a thesis like this. Have good people around you, have good listening ears. My wonderful friend Cecily, I've bent her ear so many times, and I'd say people thought, Jesus, would you ever shut up talking about your research? But it was really helpful for me to kind of vent that at times. And again, going back to my supervisors, they were absolutely incredible. I had my own psychotherapist during this again, you know, in terms of that reflexive pieces. I mean, there's no way I could sustain that and hide that in terms of my experiences. So my psychotherapist, Stefan, was incredible, I suppose, always there anytime I needed him. So I think that was a good part of it as well. So that's kind of my own research in terms of where transgender research is currently in Ireland. Currently in the process of renewing the questions for speaking from the margins. One we're in the process of doing speaking from the margins, 2 now, 8 years later on, and it'll be really interesting as a researcher to get an understanding and see how much them experiences have changed, or if they haven't, or what's coming up for people. So really looking forward to getting my teeth into that now. We've done a fair bit of work. It's ready to go to ethics, and just talking about ethics, actually, I'm really thrilled to say that TENI has developed our own ethics committee now. So there's a TENI ethics committee. So any researchers that are out there in an Irish perspective, you know, they can contact TENI ethics committee, and they will review the proposal and just ensure that the language is appropriate before we will promote a piece of research like that. So it's really, and it was a great advice from Professor Thilo Krall on UCD that we would do that. So it's great that that's in place, and just to say that the work that Veronica has done to really power through that has been phenomenal, and massive kudos to her. There is also an organisation called in Ireland called Irish Sexualities and Gender Diverse, ISGRN research group, very much led up from Dr. Siobhan Thomas and the work that she's done. So it's great that there's more trans researchers also in the domain, and it's great to meet them in terms of where they're going. And the wonderful Matt Kennedy then from Belong To is currently a PhD student. So it's great to see more and more transgender researchers researching our own experience. So again, having that insider perspective, I think it's really fabulous, because going back into, you know, certainly when I transitioned, there was very little research in there, and then I had to go with poor Faneri, who really turned that around. So I think, you know, sometimes people say we haven't gone too far. I think we've come an awful long way. I think we still have an awful long way to go. But I think, you know, by being linked into different organizations, and again, being given the platform to be able to present, and again, I'm so grateful. And I was so nervous about this presentation. I present for my job. I do it every week. But this presentation in particular gave me a lot of anxiety, I suppose, for being a transgender woman in the world, and, you know, being seen very much part of the Women in Research Ireland group. So I think maybe sometimes it's that what really gives me so much appreciation, more than anything, I suppose, an appreciation of inclusiveness, I think, in a world sometimes that can be polarized and a bit aggressive. And, you know, so you know, most transgender people, or all transgender people, really, we just want to get on with our lives and live our lives. And, you know, that research and evidence and the findings from that will hopefully inform practices as we go forward. And, you know, just to say then, you know, thank you to all of you as researchers, and for people who have come on today. And I hope I made some sense. If I did, it'd be the first time ever. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And I really appreciate you sharing your research with WIRI and with all of our attendees today, sharing your insightful research and your personal journey. It's wonderful. You know, you share about losing your father, and also, but the congratulations to finishing your research and your PhD, and just can't wait to see what you do in the future moving forward. Just absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. Before we get to the questions, we've got some questions for you, Vanessa, from our attendees. I wanted to acknowledge Dr. Sive Byrne, co-founder of WIRI, who's attending today's event. Great to see you, Sive. Now, I'm going to hand over the asking of questions to Anna Truzzi, our WIRI secretary, and WIRI committee members Emily Sheridan, Amy Grace Metcalf, and Suzanne Scott. I'll hand it over now to Anna.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Vanessa. That was so inspiring and really interesting. And so on to the questions. The first question is from Claire Howlin, and Amy will ask that.
Hi, yeah, so the first question from Claire is, Vanessa, you have a great insight into the experiences of transgender people in Ireland and in academia. What do you think needs to be done to help make academic settings more inclusive for students and staff? And do you think the Athena Swan accreditation programs adequately represent the needs of transgender people?
Yeah, God, in terms of what needs to be done, I think that transgender experiences need to be in the modules. I think the experience, and just to say, you know, kudos to a lot of the universities out there, they already have. I only taught on the occupational therapy module in UCD this week, you know, and I'm on, I think, 6 or 7 different modules in different universities. So again, the more that's happened, the more there's an inclusiveness on that. And just in terms of the Irish College of General Practitioners, the ICGP, they launched their guide last week, which we co-wrote. And coming from that, from the medical director, they want to put the modules into the undergrad and postgraduate part of that. So again, it is moving forward. This is what needs to happen. And it's leaders like that, I think, that will make that happen. In terms of Athena Swan, I'm not overly involved in that. I had been somewhat involved in LIT, but being so busy, I haven't been. I know my colleague Gordon Grehan was much more involved in Athena Swan and ensuring that there was trans representation in all the colleges. So I think in all the colleges and universities, so maybe that would go hand in hand. But I don't have as much maybe insight as I should have in that. But I think, you know, going back to the inclusiveness of being in the modules and because really we do have really, you know, a low retention rate or a high retention rate in terms of transgender researchers, and I'm very aware of that. And TENI are delighted to be able to, we will be taking on in the next couple of months a person to work specifically with transgender students in third level education. So I think that's a very positive move.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for your talk. I have the next question, and it's from Sive Byrne. Were you given any opportunity to give feedback or respond to the ethics committee who rejected your application? While, of course, ethics review is a critical component of the research process, it does seem like a massive roadblock for research on many sensitive topics, yours included. Do you think there is a need for some guidance for ethics committees across Ireland on safe and sensitive ways of carrying out research on this topic? Do you perceive there to be any change or growth in this regard in the years since your BA? Yeah,
Jesus, there's a lot of questions in there. In terms of I suppose feedback, I suppose I was contacted by somebody in WIT at that time to make a complaint about that, actually. And I just felt, you know, for me, Suzanne, it was either get through my undergrad. I thought, like, for me to get a BA in anything, you know, was number one, you know, and I had to kind of put aside that, and it was kind of like, I really wanted to fight that injustice. I felt it was an injustice, because it was called a sensitive topic. Actually, that's what it was. It's always going to be bloody sensitive if we don't address it. So I think, and I'm still, yeah, absolutely still kind of fuming over that. But so I'd want to turn it into the Golden Eric speech from Father Ted Crilly. But at the same time, I think, you know, that was quite a negative thing. I think it would have been a good piece of research. I had all that work done. It's very unfortunate, but at the same time, I had to keep focused on getting my own degree over the line, especially when I only had 3 months to put a proposal together and write that thesis and end of the year. So I had to really focus on where I needed to go. I was very conscious of my own gender transition. I was very conscious that there was very little research out there. I was very conscious that there was very little transgender researchers out there. And I felt, you know, I suppose, here I was in this position and I needed to keep going. I just needed to keep going. And I suppose that's really kind of forwarded on into my hands are going everywhere now, where that's going. But I think, you know, ethics committees have changed. I think there is a change in academia in Ireland. I think it's a very positive change. I'm sure there's negative aspects maybe that I don't hear about, but I feel that there is a positive momentum in terms of academia, and my own college that I've done, my undergrad, I know they have changed some of that perceptions in there as well, you know. And so I think, yes, there has been change. Yes, there needs to be more change. I think maybe Athena Swan will feed into that as well. So I don't know if I answered all them questions. There's so many questions in there, Suzanne.
I think that was everything. Yeah, I think so.
Thanks a million for your questions.
Hi, Vanessa. So I have another question here from Jen. So she said, hi, Vanessa, thank you very much for a great talk. I'm just wondering how you manage or recommend navigating academia as both an activist and a researcher. Something that I've been struggling with lately as a trans woman, hoping to continue after my degree, especially with the resistance we've been seeing towards trans people lately.
Yeah, that's it's kind of, for me, I suppose it was you know, choose your battles, really. It's like, if you fight every battle, you're not going to get through it. It was just like, there's some things that you think was so much injustice. Again, as I just mentioned last answer, it's like, do I fight this or do I move on? Do I look at the bigger goal? Do I focus on it? And I think for that lady who just asked that question, I think, you know, it's get through it, get your degree, focus on your degree, focus on what you need to do. And then there'll be lots of times for you to be the activist. You know, maybe, of course, you can still be an activist parallel, but just maybe manage what you do in terms of, do you spend all your time being an activist, and then all that chronic stress that's going on for you too, if you're in a situation, especially where we're in at the moment, in terms of some of the negative stuff that goes on Twitter and other areas, that can deplete you. It can really deplete you and demoralize you. And I see that all the time looking at Twitter. I don't really engage too much in Twitter, but I see what's going on. Do I engage in that, or do I look at the bigger picture, that we move on and we educate ourselves? And, you know, we are very much part of Irish society and global societies, I think, you know, because we do link with our global colleagues in terms of transgender research. So I think in terms of, you know, certainly that lady, hopefully that we will have somebody in, look, whether we have someone in position or not in TENI, we're always there to support her, absolutely. But I suppose, I'm not one for giving massive answers or suggestions, but I think really for me, I would focus more so on my research and look for us then for support, and loved ones for support.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. We have one more question from Sive Byrne about the role of supervisors. She says, the importance of good supervisors and other support people around you has really come through very clearly in your presentation, Vanessa. I've just signed up for some training on supervising research students. What tips and advices do you have for those of us who may be supporting and supervising students who are trans or gender diverse?
Yeah, God, what kind of oh my God, that's a $100 million question there. Maybe talk to Amanda, Frank, and Jennifer, and ask them what they might think. But I think really, you know, I don't think any of them had transgender training or anything beforehand. but there was never an issue, ever an issue. I think it's just, you know, be respectful, really, you know, and like, you know, apart from being trans, we're just human beings who've just gender transitioned because we felt we needed to gender transition. So I think it's just be respectful as another human being, and just use the pronouns, and, you know, you don't have to do too much, and just be a good supervisor that kicks ass at times when you need to kick ass, because I got my ass kicked too. So I think really, I don't think you need to do any courses. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think any of my supervisors done any courses, and they were fantastic. They were phenomenal. They were brilliant. They got me through this academically, and they were there to lend support anytime I needed. So yeah, if Sive ever wants to give me a shout, I can have a conversation with her as well. And I think Amanda was coming on here today, so just to tell her, and I don't know if maybe if Jennifer Frank is on as well, just to say, you know, million thanks again for all your patience in putting up with me for the last 5 years.
Thanks, Vanessa. So the next question we have is asked by Flick. It's a two-part question, so I'll start with the first, then the second. So Flick says, you talked about the lack of direct representation in early trans research and how this has affected trans women. Do you think there are parallels between this and how non-binary trans people are missing from knowledge production today?
I can't hear your question.
Oh, sorry, I'll repeat. You talked about the lack of direct representation in early trans research, okay, and how this has affected trans women. Do you think there are parallels between this and how non-binary trans people are missing from knowledge production today?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I would speak in the trainings in terms of non-binary people, in terms of, you know, one of the biggest things that stressors that they experience is the lack of validation. You know, the lack of validation. You go into the library and they're asking you, are you male or are you female? And, you know, number one, there it is. Not that I'm just making an example of libraries. Maybe they're all updated now for validating non-binary people's identity. But, you know, certainly at that time, going back 14 years or so, there was very little research in the area, especially specifically to transgender women. And you just have to fight to do that research and get that research done to validate. So I would love to see more and more research on non-binary people done. I know the University of Minnesota have done some incredible work with Jennifer McGuire. She's done some great work in terms of non-binary people. So I think maybe that's an avenue that the person who asked the question maybe can link in with as well, amongst others. And I suppose just to suggest, I suppose, when I'm here is the importance of being part of global and European organizations in terms of the World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare and the European version. I think it's imperative, I think, that our researchers are part of that organization to share information, because otherwise we can just really be part of Ireland and not share our research overseas. So in terms of not just non-binary research, but transgender research all along the line, is that we are linked in with the likes of the World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare and the sister organization EPATH and OSPATH and the rest of the different areas of transgender healthcare. So I think, you know, maybe that's something that maybe some of the people on the talk or listen on Facebook or whatever might consider joining EPATH, maybe on one of the student initiatives or something, and there's a low rate to join. I'm turning into a salesperson here. I'm trying to sell EPATH and WPATH.
Thank you. And Flick also added, it seems that there is an overrepresentation on trans women in trans research and little, if any, inclusion of, say, agender, genderqueer and gender fluid or multiple gendered people. Do you have advice for researchers of these gender identities on how to encourage researchers to include a wider scope in trans and gender research? Or do you think it's just down to us to lead by example?
I think a little bit of both. I think you need to lead by example, but also I think you need to put researchers under question who speak about transgender or LGBT research or transgender research, but omit non-binary representations or agender representations out of their research. So I think maybe call that out and say, you know, just like this question has come up now, and yes, absolutely. Part of the further research that I recommend in study is that there is research done on non-binary experiences and experiences of families with younger people, again, to again build on that research for the future. So I think, yes, I mean, we do have a part to play in it ourselves, but also the researchers who are saying their research on behalf of LGBT community or the transgender community also need to understand that there is a variety of different identities. It's not just the two.
The next question is from Jennifer Schwepp. And Jennifer asks, could I ask about submitting research to particularly UK peer-reviewed journals and dealing with reviews that are informed by anti-trans ideology?
Jesus, Jennifer, yeah, that's the hardest question. Can you ask that question again? God almighty.
Sure. So it's about submitting research and particularly to UK peer-reviewed journals, okay, and dealing with reviews that are informed by anti-trans ideology.
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm really sorry. I don't know. I've never experienced that, so I'm sure it happens, but I really, honestly, I'm really sorry, Jennifer. I don't have the answer to that question.
So we have one last question, I think. Time for one last question. We have one here from Marie. So as a Black student who understands the struggle we face in education and workplace, how can I bring awareness and be an ally without my own Blackness struggles overshadowing me addressing trans LGBTQIA+ issues within my own BAME community in uni?
Can you ask that question again?
Yeah, so it's from Marie. So as a Black student who understands the struggles we face in education and workplace, she's asking, how can I bring awareness and be an ally without my own Blackness struggles overshadowing her addressing trans and LGBTQIA issues within her own BAME community in uni?
Maybe true. I mean, like, we're all human beings, and it's the diversity of human beings. And I think, you know, for either trans people or lesbian or gay people or bisexual people or Black people or people from other continents or other religions, I think we need to forge together and you know, share hands in humanity, that we go together with all of us rather than having people off in different spaces that we forget about them. So I think we need to be together on that as a human race. So I think as a Black person who is advocating for trans people, or a trans person who's advocating for Black people or anything else, I think we're in it together more than anything. So I think, you know, it's diversity. But I don't know what kind of an answer that is, but I don't know if it answers the question, but I wish I had a better answer, but I don't know.
Thank you, Vanessa. I think that's a really nice place to end today's talk. Our diversity is our strength, and that's something to embrace and enjoy. I really appreciate your time, Vanessa, today. Again, congratulations on completing your PhD. Thank you to all of the WIRI members who attended today. Thank you so much to our attendees and your wonderful questions. And we really look forward to welcoming you to our next talk in February. But for now, it's goodbye from WIRI. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa.
You're very welcome. Thanks a million.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.